So today I want to tell you guys about something that can potentially change your life, because I know it changed my life, and it's something that has helped me improve in every facet. My career, my friendships, my relationships, my family life, my spiritual life, anything involving breathing, living, this will help to change you. But before I can tell you how it can change your life, I'm going to tell you a little bit about how it changed mine with a small example. But for this example to work, you need to know a little bit about me. I am an audiophile, and although that sounds kind of like a weird, creepy thing, like you're not quite sure what it means, all it means is that I'm a huge fan of recorded music. So any kind of recorded music, I love it. I'm sure you guys know about MP3s, CDs, cassette tapes, 8-tracks, I don't know, no one really listens to those, and records. But records are my favorite thing. I listen to vinyl records. But the history of records is really cool because for decades and decades, that was the only way that people could listen to music. And before they had plastics and they had vinyl, they actually listened to records on metal. And I've seen some of these metal records, and it's kind of cool. Not like metal like the music records, but actually records made of metal. And that was the only way that people could listen to their music. It was a really interesting medium. And the first time I ever heard a vinyl record, I was at my Uncle Jim's house. He owns over 10,000 CDs and over 1,000 LPs, or records. And in fact, just a side note, when he went to file insurance for all of his CDs and records that he owned, the insurance company didn't believe him, and they hung up on him like multiple times when he would call in, until finally he had them send a representative out to his house that like saw that he had walls of CDs, and so he could get that insurance. But the first time I ever heard a vinyl record was at my Uncle Jim's house, and it was the Jackson 5's ABC. I feel like we all know this song, but I feel like the first time when the needle dropped on the record and it started playing, I'd heard ABC like 1,000 times before. But something was different. Something changed inside of me when I heard it on vinyl. Hearing like the pops and the cracks and imagining the nostalgia of someone who, back when this record first came out, they'd never heard the song and they put it down on their turntable and they had some friends sitting around, you know, having a listening party, and they put it on and they heard the song for the very first time. It wasn't a classic, it wasn't an oldie, but it was brand new right then. And I felt like I had kind of a connection with those people when I was listening to this. And right then I knew vinyl records, like I want to listen to my favorite music on vinyl records. And so I asked my Uncle Jim, I was like, what kind of record player should I get? I tried doing research on my own, but there's so many record players now, and a lot of them are made for DJs, a lot of them are made for people who just want to look cool. They're not really functional. Like you can get one at Urban Outfitters, like $100, but it's not really that good of a record player. It just like looks cool. So I did a lot of research, but I couldn't come to a conclusion. So I went back to Uncle Jim. I'm like, he knows about vinyl. I'll ask him. And he told me that he had extra record players, and he told me that he'd give me one. It wasn't even my birthday or Christmas or anything, but it felt like it because he just gave me this record player and about 40 records, and it was a great one. It's an old Pioneer. And it's got a start-stop switch, so you don't have to drop the needle on yourself. It has a pause button, which I didn't even know that a record player could have a pause button. It does 45s, it does 33s, just fantastic. Self-balancing, for the most part, self-balancing. We'll get to that. So I got this record player, I was like, this thing's advanced, this thing is cool. And I went to set it up, and the first record I wanted to listen to was Bob Dylan's Highway 61 Revisit. I felt like that'd be like a really cool record to be the first one I listened to. So I got the record out, I put it on, and I set everything up because I know how to use a record player. You know, I've been using them for forever. Of course, I know how to use one. So I set it up. I pressed the start-stop button with the needle. It went up, it went over, and I was just sitting there like tingling with anticipation, ready to hear this record. But I didn't hear Highway 61 Revisit. I heard this awful sound. And it was just this scratching, this screeching sound, and I realized I had committed the cardinal vinyl sin. I had scratched that record. And the thing about records is, they're not like CDs, where if you get a scratch on a CD, you can kind of like smudge it out sometimes. They have these little devices you can buy that would get the scratches out. When a record scratches, it's done. And you'll never be able to get that scratch out. And if it's bad enough, as this was, then it starts skipping. Which means you can't just sit down and like listen to it anymore. If it starts skipping, you have to try to move the needle to a place where it doesn't skip. It was awful. I felt terrible. I had ruined that record, and I knew that like I could never fix that. That record was permanently done. So I thought about why did this have to happen? What can I learn from this? What can I do better in the future? What I realized is that I didn't ask questions. I didn't ask my uncle, hey, how do I set this up? I didn't ask my dad, hey, do I need to balance the needle correctly? I just looked at it and said, this thing's so cool, like it just goes. Start. You know, my little millennial press play on my CD player mentality, I'll just let it go and it'll be fine. A lot of people say that there are no stupid questions, but I disagree. I think there's one stupid question, and that's, should I ask this question? I think in life we get too hung up on not wanting to ask questions. We don't want to seem stupid. We don't want to seem weak. We don't want to seem like we don't know what we're talking about. So we don't ask questions. But what I've found in every aspect of my life, whether it's in a relationship, whether it's at work, is that if I ask questions, it enhances everything and it makes everything better. But why don't we do these things? It's because we don't want to seem weak. We don't want to bother anyone. Oh, excuse me, can I ask you a quick question? We don't want to bother anyone. And we don't want to ask the wrong questions. We want to ask questions that seem like they're actually pertinent to what it is that we need to know. And not asking questions, though, the thing about not asking questions is we don't want to fail, so we want to do it on our own, but not asking questions can lead to failure. It can lead to failure in friendships. It can lead to failures in your family. It can lead to failures at work. It can lead to failures with a spouse. It can lead to kidney failure. It can lead to heart failure. It can lead to death. Okay, maybe not those things. Maybe that's a little much. But not asking questions can lead to failure in almost every aspect of our life. And I think that sometimes we don't realize how important it really is to ask those questions. In a study done by Sacramento State, they found that there were a bunch of different reasons that people should ask questions. And they weren't just, oh, you should ask questions because it'll make you better, but real empirical reasons why we need to ask questions. Eliciting answers. Of course, that seems natural. Like, you ask a question to get an answer. Simple. Gaining insight and information. That's getting a little deeper when your question is going to start helping you understand, for example, how to do your job better. Instead of asking, should I do this, which is a yes or no, you ask how you do something. So you're going to start understanding a little more of how to do things. It also helps provide direction. When you're asking questions, it'll help you understand the direction things need to go in and why you're doing those things and how to best do them. I want to tell you guys a story that I asked a bunch of people about situations where they hadn't asked questions. And this story, I'm going to say that it's a female, and I'm going to say that her name is Jane. For all you know, it could be a guy named Bill, but we're going to go with a female named Jane. She worked for an advertising agency. And when she started there, she started as like a junior account executive. But one of her responsibilities was to hold a creative meeting. And an account executive's job is to be like kind of a liaison between the agency and the client. So when you're in the agency, you're representing the client. When you're with the client, you're representing the agency. And in a creative meeting, from what she told me, you're supposed to have what's called a creative brief. And this is what the client expects the campaign to be. But Jane didn't know this. So Jane just went and said, well, creative meeting, you just kind of come up with things that you think will work for the client. Like, that's our job. We know what we're doing. We don't, like, yeah, I have their ideas and I kind of know, but we'll just see where this goes. So they came up with this campaign and they loved it. It was creative, it was cool, it was hip, it was now, it was everything they thought that this company would need for a campaign. But then, after they did all of the work on the different media that they needed to provide the client with, and they had done research, they went to the client, they showed the client they were ready, and the client hated it. All of their resources, all of their money, all of their time was wasted. And why? It was because Jane didn't want to go to her manager and say, oh, what do I need to do in a creative meeting? It's because Jane didn't want to even go to one of her peers, another account executive, and ask them, oh, what is it exactly that I need to do for this meeting to be the most effective? If she had asked one question, it would have helped her to be able to be successful, to be able to have a good campaign, to be able to put something on her resume that she could be proud of, but she didn't. And this doesn't only apply in your career. I feel like for me, the place I found it most effective is in a career, but I also found that it works a lot in relationships. But for it to work in relationships, you have to actually ask questions that you want to hear the answer to. You can't just say, oh, how are you doing? But you want to let the person know that you really do care, because there's power in questions. Questions aren't weakness, as we discussed earlier. In fact, that same study by Sacramento State showed that questions can help you gain control. It can help other people feel important. And it can create what they call the yes momentum, which is where if you're asking questions that people are answering yes to, simple questions, it can get them on a path to accepting a larger idea, and which works well in relationships, it works well in the workplace, in every facet of life. The one thing that stops us from being successful is our pride. Because we don't want to ask questions, we don't want to seem stupid, we don't want to seem like we don't know what it is that we're doing. But one question can change the world if you can ask one question. And all you have to do, the simplicity of all of this, is just ask. Thank you.
Woo! Yeah!
Hey, I like that.
Really?